So I'm happy to introduce Parvati Dev, PhD and the President and CEO of Innovation and Learning, Inc., and co-creator of Clinispace, ILL's award-winning virtual medical environment for healthcare training. Parvati is also a distinguished visiting scholar for MediaX, which is wonderful. Prior to ILL, she was at Stanford University School of Medicine, where she directed the internationally recognized Learning Technologies Lab Summit, which actually contributed a lot of the technologies to the Li Ka-shing building, which is wonderful. They received many awards and did a lot of groundbreaking work with multimedia, web, and simulation for medical education, including numerous peer-reviewed publications. And with that, please join me in welcoming Parvati Dev.
So I talk about these things many times, what I'm going to talk about today, in many different ways. And so today, with the focus on interactive media, I'm going to try to do it a little differently. If I stumble a bit, it's because I haven't done it quite this way before. Normally, I'm talking to medical people or people doing medical simulations, and they want me to just get on with it and show me the simulations, and that's it. So here I'm going to stop and talk and discuss a little bit about what we've done, why we've done it, what we consider successes, things we have a lot of questions about. This is really a field that is wide open. There's tons of research to be done here, lots to be learned. So, okay, interactive media in healthcare. Here's kind of how I'm going to go about it. I'm going to use simulations as my examples. Now, healthcare, media in healthcare covers everything from graphics, anatomy, 3D anatomy. I mean, you name it, it's there. I'm going to use simulations. And that's because that's what we are doing a lot of right now. And I'll talk a little bit about why simulations in healthcare kind of have some stringent requirements in how they work, how you interact with them, what you offer. Unlike many other simulations, particularly engineering simulations where people are very accustomed to a diagrammatic approach, in healthcare you have to figure out how far to go with realism, how realistic to make it, how much like the space people are familiar with, the people they're familiar with, the level of detail, the medical detail necessary. So these are all issues that come up in healthcare that perhaps don't come up in many other fields. And the huge problem we have, which is most of our users are busy professionals. They don't want to bother with anything that's complex. You're taking a really complex thing and you're presenting it to people who want you to completely hide the complexity. And that is actually not always doable and very challenging. And all along the way, I'm going to mention things that I consider open topics for study, examination, thought, research, because we're all moving so fast. And I have to say, industry has jumped in so early into this game that it's like marbles falling off the table in all directions of things that one needs to actually look at. Okay. So what do I mean by simulation, specifically virtual simulation? For me, it's really about experiencing. It's about doing it. It's about being in the situation versus being told about it. And I'm actually going to try to run some for you with Jason's help. So there are many, many kinds of simulation in healthcare. Just straightforward role playing. Two of us get together and we act out a situation. That's a simulation. There's a lot of work with mannequins, plastic, full-size human mannequins that look like they are breathing, their eyes move, their fingers move. They're very realistic representations of patients. And we have a good few over in the med school. Surgical procedures, where you hold a real tool in your hand, but it's going through a hole in the wall into a virtual space. And you are practicing surgery on virtual anatomy. This is something we did a lot of work on in the early days and is now actually, the systems developed by companies are in wide use. Funnily enough, just a side note, one of the companies we knew very well called Symbionics developed these laparoscopic simulators and sort of IV simulators. And who did they get bought by? a 3D printing company. And we're all scratching our heads, you know. Why is a 3D printing company buying a surgical simulation company? And we think, nobody's told us, but we think it's because the opportunity to create 3D custom anatomy of an actual patient can now be put together with the ability to practice the surgery beforehand. And I think that's amazing. So what I'm going to talk about is what's in the top right corner. 3D worlds on the computer, accessed in many different ways, computer, phone, mobile, iPad, with people in them, with multiple people in them, and all interactive. Okay. So I'm going to show you a video first.
We were. I can't believe that big bus rolled over downstairs in the emergency department. I hope all those patients are okay. I need a nurse. Is one of you a nurse?
I am.
Hi, Natalie. Is that your name?
Yes, I'm Natalie.
I just
Nice to meet you.
just met your name badge there. Sorry.
Okay, thanks, Norm.
Let me just back up a bit.
Okay.
So can you get her name, if you mind?
So these are, each one is a real person taking a role,
Please,
and
I don't feel well.
they're practicing
I'm just getting the register
working with a patient who has just been delivered by the EMT.
And we want to see that all behind.
Oh, where am I?
And somebody's acting the role of the patient also. So let me just stop right there. And just think about the simulation, what's in it, and what people are using it for, what works and what doesn't. So first of all, we have a room. The room is full of medical equipment. It's a simple room. It's just a ward, bed, stuff on the headboard, stuff on the counter, gloves, phone. All of them, if you click on them, they will work, and we will try that out later. But what's more important, I think, in this simulation is that people are able to join together in this space and work as though it's a real patient. And if we actually tried it out, you would get that feeling that, yes, I am talking with this person, and yes, we are with this patient by the bed. They practice working with the patient, but more than anything, these people are practicing talking with each other. You would never think that that's what a simulation would be. But think about the ease of that user interface. I just have a headset, microphone, and my main job is to figure out how to talk accurately with the patient and accurately with the other people, right? It's a communication issue, and it's something that these words are used quite a lot for. So let me stop that one temporarily and go back to the, okay. All right. So, see if I can do it like this. Yeah. So these are just a sample of the kinds of things that we are simulating currently. You already saw the patient in the ward, but you can just as easily set up a simulation of a disaster on the road. This is an earthquake. Buildings are falling, fires, electrical poles are falling over, and people are wounded. Medically, the main thing is the wounded people, but there's many other things you can teach around that. This is a wound care, ambulance going to the home, helicopter evacuation, again back in the ward, fire, and a clinic, right? So what is the main point about this? That you can create many, many different situations, make them real, and allow people to try things safely. And of course, nowadays, we have the option to add a gaming layer. For those of you who are familiar with games, it means a lot of different things. Most of us in healthcare simply add a scoring layer, and that's it. But actually, the potential for adding levels, for adding training capabilities, for going from novice to a manager of a hospital, I think the potential is enormous. We just I do not know anybody who has successfully really done a large-scale implementation of such a game in healthcare. I know a lot of games, but they're more medical games, but I would call them mayhem games. They're about the poor patient, and it's about a lot of destruction. So virtual simulations, they're about experiences. They're about experiences in safe environments, and you can recreate almost any situation in them. So I want to show you a bunch of different videos. So this is we are the only people there because nobody else is there right now. But this is a clinic. It's a real place. We photographed it and we recreated it in 3D. It's in Atlanta. This is for dialysis. People who are under dialysis come in 3 times a week. They're connected to the dialysis machine, which is basically taking the blood out of their body, running it through the machine, removing the poisons that need to be removed, and putting it back. It takes about 4 hours, the whole process, and it requires connecting an outside object directly to your bloodstream. It's extremely dangerous, and yet it's done all the time, every day, for thousands of people, almost always pretty safely. So you have to teach people how to do it safely. So I'll just show you a little bit of this video. Go. Yeah. And it's like one of our simulations. You choose a character. And in this case, we only have the one patient. You could have a lot of patients. And this is what you have to learn, how to remove that dressing, clean that place, and attach the tube from the dialysis machine to this. When and how often to clean your hands, gloves, how to hold the dressing, how to hold the catheter. Very, very boring stuff, actually, if you had to do it. And you have to do it multiple times a day. It has to become an automatic sequence. So this is a perfect gaming opportunity. It's a perfect opportunity to get them to play mini games along the way. This is a mini game of preparing your tray of supplies and getting them to do this from beginning to end without a flaw. That's the whole point of it. It takes about an hour to go through this, and actually people really enjoy it. People who are accustomed to doing dialysis really like to do this, and if they give them a new method, they will do it again and again to get it right. We have tried in between to make sorting games, collection games, little mobile, hand movement games. You learn to move your swab correctly, things like that. So I'm going to stop that there because this is going to keep going forever. Maybe I should see if I can show you some other things. So here they're starting up. They're going to prepare they're being shown how they should move that swab as they do it, and they have to physically move the swab in the right along the arrows to make this work. The correct sequence of cleaning, opening, and so on. So you would understand this. So I'm showing you a different app. This actually is meant to run on the iPad. And here, interface was very important to us. And I have to, by the way, stop for a second, introduce Dr. Heinrichs in the back row, who is my co-founder of Innovation in Learning and the architect of this particular application. So it's one of our most interactive applications. And because it's meant to run on the iPad, you have to imagine that I'm tapping. And
all right, there you are, Erin.
it simulates a field hospital.
Now, here's the way we instruct the letters.
So you drag this litter out, literally like that. That's the interface. And the sergeant is your mentor. So instead of having text, we have text pop up, but we actually have him be it.
It is injury scenes like landing. Delayed is when...
Okay, there we go. So, and the other thing we did with this graphics was we made it kind of grungy graphic novel style because the target was a young
Check this guy out.
typically a young male or young female. So we are now in the field hospital, and you have to decide, do I look at the chest because that's what's bleeding, or do I look at his head? And if I click on the chest,
A is for airway.
it's a A is for airway. You do the ABC. So the first thing is check if he's breathing.
So let me hold down the forehead and lift the chin to clear the airway.
Okay, so he's doing that. And then the
There. His airway should be open now. There might still be some secretions. Why don't you pinch and zoom to see it clearly?
so you use your fingers.
Or obstructing material. That blood is probably coming from below. Let's suck it out by placing the bulb from our supply bank on the patient's mouth.
So he's giving a whole series of instructions. You're supposed to use your fingers now on the iPad and open the mouth. So I'm just going to click on the mouth, and then I've got the wrong resolution on this one, so I can't see the full thing, so I won't continue. But basically, I would drag the suction bulb onto the mouth and squeeze out, remove the blood. Then I would drag the stethoscope to him, and I would check. So I would first of all open up his airway, then I would make so all that stuff is removed. Then make sure his heart is beating. And then when I check the lungs on both sides, I find that the right side is not working. As a last step, I would actually put a chest tube in, clear the lungs, and then we would evacuate him by helicopter. So I simply don't have the right resolution here, so I can't do that. But you get the idea. So this one, just let me stop and say, from the interface point of view, this was actually a really fun one to do, because you could use the hands, which we can't use on the laptop, and you could do the swipe, the pinch, the drag, and interestingly, because you're holding that iPad, when the heart beats, you can actually feel it in your hand, or the breathing, and it just felt like you had a more immediate connection to the patient, which is something I didn't expect. I mean, I thought it was just going to be the same as a click and drag on the laptop, but it actually caused a different feeling, sort of more greater closeness to the patient. And I have to say, I didn't expect that. I didn't understand that would happen, but it did. Okay, I'm going to show you something that's a very different. So this is for EMTs. It's for EMT training. It's for the first exam that EMTs take. So I'm going to act as this person. Proceed. And now let me see if I can make that big again. Oh, there she is. Okay. So it begins with a little clip. It introduces a story that the EMT is being called. And this is more for setting up the feeling. But once they are there, I'll tell you what it's supposed to do, and then I'll show you what I think is interesting about the interactive aspects. What it's supposed to do is walk an EMT learner through all the steps of a scenario that they would be scored on in an actual high-stakes exam. So the first one would be scene size up. Like, they've got to decide that it's safe. So they have to look around, and I'm using the arrows to look around. They have to look around and decide if this is a safe place. Clearly there's a fire, something sharp, perhaps a motor that's running, not clear. And if you were to leave all these alone and say that the scene was safe, it would score you as a negative. But let's say I say it's safe. Did I say safe? Well, it's not safe. Okay, my mistake. All right, I should have said no, it was not safe. If it was safe, if I had said no, all these dangers would have disappeared. So I made a mistake. Now, let's just look at the other kinds of things. You can go up and talk with this person. So you have the option to ask him questions.
Sir, what's wrong?
I don't know. I just feel very ill. My chest hurts.
So first point, when we first made this app, we just used text for the dialogue. We didn't have voice. And you learn just as much, but you don't get engaged. Just adding the voice to the characters brought people into the story that much more. So from the point of view of an interface, this is something we try as far as possible to insist on. We need dialogue. Why do we not want to put dialogue? You put in a voice, if there's one error, you have to re-record, put the new file in. You want to change the language, you have to do it all completely. If you can do it with text, it's easy, right? So from the developer's point of view, we would rather not do it. From the user's point of view, an interface without real voice just isn't as good. Let me take him into the ambulance, okay? So he's in the ambulance, and as far as the interaction goes, you can click and see various things. The defibrillator is active, the medication, the body substance isolation, there's a radio, equipment, and so on. So you literally have an ambulance where we try to take the physical wooden box that they use for their ambulance and replicate it virtually. I can immediately see that I made a mistake again, and I did not give her gloves. Now I've given her gloves. I mean, I would have failed that exam before I even started for not putting the gloves on. Let me show you some examples of the depth of, yeah, I knew it was going to happen. I'm going to just show you some of the things you can do with the patient. Let's see. We can take the stethoscope, for example. And why am I not able to do this? Come back. So let's get some airway first. Oxygen. We want to get some airway equipment on him. So we first begin maybe by attaching a mask. It shows you what the mask is. And now you see there's a mask on him. Now we can actually click on this mask. Let's get a view that's a little up like that. And say, okay, please perform the action necessary. So if the scenario requires you to pump the bag, then that's what you should do. And it checks that you have done it. You can actually go back to that view. We can add other things like, I wanted to show you some of the like horrendous detail that you have to do. Let me remove this one. So they've put a device on him, which then allows them to attach a carbon dioxide detector to see whether he's actually really breathing. Because if he's really breathing, then the carbon dioxide will be picked up on this detector. The color will change, as you saw. Equipment like this it's all part of this interface that you're creating for people. And the question always is, do I need it or don't I? And since it is all part of that exam, you literally have to go ahead and create all of these and figure out how to make them work for this person. Again, I have not gone through it sequentially, so I haven't shown you how they actually use it. The entire scenario would probably take maybe from beginning to end about 20 minutes. I mean, literally 5 minutes in the house, move them over, and then finally when they end up, they have to call the hospital. So they go ahead and call the radio and call the hospital. We just put up a little scene that says what you should say. And in the end, you take them to the hospital, and that's the end of the scenario. And it goes. Then when you're done with it, you get a score sheet. And this is literally the scoring that they expect to do for the exam. And I think that the more we can make our simulations linked to classroom requirements, the more useful they're going to be for the curriculum. Not saying for other things, but for the curriculum. So for example, scene size up, is the situation safe? I got a 0 because I made a mistake, and so on. And there are certain things you simply cannot score on a computer, and those are scored by a facilitator who's observing. So let me stop that. I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint and run through some items and thoughts that I wanted to show you. Okay. Firstly, that you can do a lot of different simulations. Constructing simulations is so much faster than making physical spaces or even doing role playing or with mannequins, that this is something that this is one reason I think this is going to happen a lot more. So a hospital reception area or a clinical reception area, how you meet, how you greet, lecture rooms, conference rooms, we always get requests for this. It's so funny because you can do simulations of the most exciting things, and then they'll ask you, I want a conference room. Okay. So, and the conference room, actually each laptop is active, so you can use the laptop and go out into the internet. Emergency rooms, all of that equipment, the EKG machine, the ultrasound machine, the EMR, the closets, the monitors, the bed up and down, all of these work. So the interface is very detailed. A ward, much simpler, but still has requirements. A typical exam room where a patient comes in just like you do when you go to the clinic. Physician sits down on a stool. Very little in the way of tools, mostly communication and examination, physical examination. Somebody asked us for a telemedicine room. They never used it, but we mocked it up for them, where you could actually practice the whole telemedicine process. Supply rooms. Supply rooms potentially, inventory control and learning this management is actually something that's very, very useful, and I don't think anybody that I know of is doing it. And if they are, it's all private bills that we never hear about. Office spaces, the home that you saw, inside of the home, person with a heart attack, the ambulance that you saw. This is our mass casualty earthquake scenario. This is very interesting because we worked with the University of Memphis to create, to use their intelligent tutoring system to build an intelligent tutor into the world, to explain about how you deal with this type of taking control of a situation like this. You saw the military, and then you have to create characters. People in street clothes, patients of all different kinds, ages, ethnicities, genders, the physical trauma that might have happened, the different roles in the hospital, babies. This is from the left to right, that's a healthy baby. That's a baby that's kind of low tone, and then a baby that's actually ingested meconium in the womb and so can't breathe. And that's an emergency situation. But it's a very common situation. The EMT, people, victims of trauma, earthquake. And then behind all this has to be a story. And this is an example of a story. And again, this is Dr. Heinrichs' scenario that he built. And the story has to progress, right? So when you begin the story, a woman is in labor. She's in the delivery room in the hospital. And labor is ongoing. So the things in that scenario, as you're working through that scenario, you're actually taking care of this woman, and you have to take the right steps. Once the baby is delivered, we see that the mother is still bleeding. And then what is it that you need to worry about at that point? Just on a side note, this is actually one of the scenarios that's taught very commonly for students and residents, is hemorrhage after delivery. Why? How serious is it? And what you should do? And the biggest thing that one wants to teach is quantitation. How much blood is lost? Is it level 1, level 2, level 3? How worried should I be? And how much help should I call for? So the clinical things that you should have done are written down here. They will be in the scenario. If you'd done it, you would, it would score you correctly and probably move you faster through the scenario. But let's say you do the right things and she's still bleeding. So then, what are the things that I need to think about next? And in this particular scenario, the situation is that there is a cervical laceration that if you don't catch and suture, she will continue to bleed. If you do that, then the bleeding stops and the simulation stops, and you are given a debrief. All along the way, it can be tracked against requirements, just like we saw in the ambulance situation. So behind every simulation must sit one or more stories like this. And this is where I think anybody doing simulation has the hardest time. Because you start with a story, somebody wants to simulate something. You build a world that represents that story. But typically you want to use the world for other stories. And getting people to articulate stories that have learning value and that still work in that world without requiring you to keep on developing, so that you end up with a world that has a whole set of scenarios. That is probably the single biggest barrier to getting simulations used widely. If you think about your own classes, you have to generate homeworks. You can talk and lecture, but you have to generate homeworks. So I can see people giving me signals, so I better stop. We've tested some of these. We have results that show that the simulations teach as well as the typical gold standard. If you do the simulation well, it really works very well. So it's not a question of whether the simulation works, whether it teaches, it does. It is, do I have enough of them? How easy is it to put it into the workflow of the classroom? Can I really put these to use? And so on.